When I committed to attending Scripps for my master's in marine biodiversity and conservation, I had a clear image in my mind of what life would look like as a graduate student here. I imagined going to the beach between classes, getting my scuba certification, learning to stand up on a surfboard, and eating a lot of tacos. And this vision came true to an extent. But you can maybe imagine my surprise when my capstone project also brought me to Rome, Italy for a month this spring. Rome is a city by the sea, but it isn't technically a coastal city. So how did a capstone project for a marine-focused degree land me in Italy for a month? The answer to that question lies in the power of sustainable aquaculture. The global aquaculture sector is growing quickly. The blue section on this graph represents production from capture fisheries, or species that are caught in the wild, and the purple section represents global aquaculture production from raising and farming aquatic species. While capture fishery production has remained fairly constant over time, aquaculture has seen huge gains, and especially in the past few decades. This growth is also projected to continue throughout the next decade and beyond, as you can see in the lighter purple on this graph. This is good news because we rely on aquaculture to meet nutrition and food security needs across the globe, and especially in impoverished nations. However, this growth requires significant resources in the form of ecosystem inputs like nutrients, water, feed, and seed, and in the form of social resources as well. The challenge is to ensure that as aquaculture continues to grow, it does so sustainably. A key tool for addressing this challenge lies in a technical document called the Guidelines for Sustainable Aquaculture. The Guidelines for Sustainable Aquaculture, or the GSA, are a series of comprehensive recommendations on how to scale the global aquaculture sector sustainably, equitably, and productively. In short, the GSA are like a user manual for sustainable aquaculture practices. They cover topics from governance, resource use, social responsibility, value chains, and more. And the goal of the GSA is really to help policymakers and aquaculture stakeholders around the globe implement sustainable aquaculture practices. Importantly, the GSA were developed by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or the FAO, who just so happened to be headquartered in Rome. Now, the GSA is a dense document with 165 individual recommendations across 10 different chapters, but I wanted to share a couple of quick examples to give you a sense of what these guidelines actually look like. So these examples come from Chapter 5 of the GSA, which covers sustainable resource use. And this first example asks states and stakeholders to promote low trophic aquaculture species, such as filter feeding finfish, algae and seaweeds, and bivalve mollusks that are properly managed to provide ecosystem services and reduce negative impacts on surrounding ecosystems. That's guideline 5.1.5. Another example from Chapter 5 encourages diversification of food production and income by integrating aquaculture with other systems, such as combined rice and fish farming, aquaponics, and other integrated farming practices. This will enhance sustainability, productivity, efficiency, and resilience of people, communities, and ecosystems. That's guideline 5.2.2. So as you can see, the guidelines cover important principles and techniques for driving sustainable aquaculture growth. The challenge is that these recommendations are fairly broad. By design, they provide guidance for aquaculture at every level and every region across the globe. As a result, the guidelines are not currently as operational or as usable as they could be. FAO recognizes this challenge, and since the formal adoption of the guidelines in 2024, they have set out to operationalize the GSA. Operationalizing the GSA involves grounding the guidelines in concrete examples and developing systems for helping GSA users monitor and evaluate the success of these guidelines in practice. The overall goal is to take the guidelines from abstract, theoretical, and broad to concrete, actionable, and measurable. This is where my capstone project comes in. My role was to take one chapter of the GSA and operationalize its guidelines. I chose Chapter 5, which is the chapter discussing sustainable resource use, ecosystem, and farm management, which covers 7 subchapters and 63 individual guidelines. So there were 3 key phases to this work. The first was develop theories of change. The second, identify examples of the recommendations in practice. And the third, to identify indicators of success for each guideline. So the first phase of the project was to write theories of change. These are papers that expand on the goal, the background, and the key challenges of each subchapter, share impact pathways, provide justification for how each recommendation will improve aquaculture sustainability, and address any assumptions, risks, and enabling conditions for the subchapter. The aim of these documents is to provide context and detailed explanations of how the guidelines will lead to more sustainable aquaculture. Phase 2 was to find examples of each guideline in practice out in the real world with the hope of grounding the GSA in concrete, easily demonstrated examples. To find these examples, I completed a comprehensive literature review, searching journal articles, FAO technical papers, and gray literature like conference reports and web pages to find national examples of each recommendation. And the goal here wasn't to find every example, but just to collect a few useful ones that would provide inspiration or help stakeholders conceptualize what these recommendations could look like in action. The third phase was to find indicators of success, or to identify different ways to measure if a guideline had been implemented and how successfully. Indicators were also found through a literature review, and they often measured biological, environmental, economic, and social factors. So, for example, lowered energy inputs, greater feed conversion ratios, or increase in farmer income could all be indicators of success depending on the recommendation. The hope for this phase of work was to provide policymakers and stakeholders with tools to measure and evaluate the GSA. Taken together, these three components, the theories of change, examples, and indicators, aim to make the Chapter 5 recommendations of the GSA more concrete, easier to implement, and more measurable. So, if you think back to the two recommendations that we shared earlier in the presentation, I now want to show you what both of those recommendations look like when they're translated into examples. So the first guideline that we talked about was a recommendation for low trophic aquaculture, or co-culturing species that are at different levels of the food web. The map on the screen shows the results of my literature review for this guideline. So the countries in green on the map all had verified examples of low trophic aquaculture in practice. Some of the different forms that this took were growing fish and algae together in Spain and Portugal, growing kelp with abalone in South Africa, and co-culturing scallops, oysters, and kelp in China. Revisiting the second example that we talked about, I now want you to think about integrated aquaculture with other farming systems. So the countries in green are again where we identified examples of integrated aquaculture in practice. And some examples here included fish rice farming in Vietnam and aquaponics systems in Indonesia, Myanmar, and the US. And it's worth noting again that these examples are not meant to be an exhaustive list of every integrated aquaculture system or low trophic aquaculture system in the world. This is just meant to provide a quick regional overview of some useful examples to ground the recommendations. As I worked on this project, a few things became extremely clear. First and foremost, sustainable aquaculture practices are effective and enduring. While the guidelines themselves were published in 2024, we have examples of the techniques and the practices described in the guidelines that go back decades and even thousands of years. Fish rice farming, for example, has been in practice in Asia for over 2,000 years. So the role of the GSA and of this project is really to help communicate these effective, sustainable aquaculture practices and make them easier to implement. This also tells us that sustainable aquaculture is happening out in the world. And this might seem like a simple or an obvious takeaway, but I think it's an important one. Aquaculture often gets a bad reputation for harming ecosystems or contributing to social inequity, but extensive literature reviews have showed that there are many cases across the globe where aquaculture has led to more sustainable, healthy, and productive systems. Another major takeaway from my project is how fundamental collaboration is to all of this work. My project alone represents collaboration with fisheries and aquaculture experts and 3 separate groups of graduate students, all working together to develop theories and tools and resources to operationalize these guidelines and promote their uptake. Even beyond that, building out the sector's sustainability is a massive collaboration across global institutions like FAO, policymakers from countries all across the globe, and public-private partnerships, everything in between. This was made very clear during my time working out of FAO headquarters in Rome. So the picture that you see on the bottom right is taken in the flag room at the FAO headquarters, which displays the flags of the 193 FAO member nations. You walk through the space as you pass in and out of the office every day, and it was a really nice reminder of just how many players are invested in improving the world of aquaculture through this work, and I'm very grateful to have been able to witness and participate. Tackling global challenges like sustainable aquaculture is a huge undertaking, but I left Rome feeling optimistic about our ability to implement lasting solutions after seeing the level of partnership and dedication at play in this space. I feel fortunate that my project was able to contribute even a small piece to helping implement the guidelines for sustainable aquaculture and advance the health and resilience of our aquatic ecosystems. In the theme of collaboration, this work would not have been possible without the support, expertise, and guidance of my wonderful capstone committee, Dr. Amber Himes-Cornell, Dr. Simona Ogite, and Dr. Dale Squires. A huge thank you also to Samantha Murray, Hannah Tannenbaum, my friends and family for their support, and my amazing MBC cohort. With that, I will take any questions.
Hey, Sophie. Great presentation. I'm a little jealous you went to Rome, but did you see any challenges or hear of any challenges that the U.S. faces on their aquaculture programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of the challenges with implementing aquaculture in the U.S. come from the different players involved in the space and the permitting process. There isn't one designated authority on aquaculture in the U.S. It's split across the different federal agencies. And then you have state aquaculture policies as well. The process of actually getting permits to implement aquaculture here, I think, is one of the biggest hurdles.
So it dawned on me as you were talking that not all aquaculture is marine. And I was just curious in your, exemplar, in your literature review of examples of sustainable aquaculture, is it dominated by marine or freshwater or balanced in the world?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I also expected there to be a lot more marine aquaculture, not that there isn't a lot of it, but many non-coastal countries have a lot of freshwater aquaculture. I couldn't speak to the exact breakout of freshwater versus brackish versus marine, but there's a ton of freshwater aquaculture as well.
I've got a question, Sophie. I'm thinking about some of the, we have some incoming students here in the room and watching online. Yay. So that makes me, yay. So that makes me want to ask, in the spirit of like a next chapter of this project, was there any part of the project that you wish you had more time to investigate, that you wish you could dive deeper into if you had more time?
Thank you for the question. I've focused the bulk of my work on finding examples and case studies of the guidelines in practice, and I wish I'd had more time to dedicate to identifying indicators of success. I think that'll be a really useful piece in helping us measure and evaluate and modify how sustainable aquaculture is implemented in the world. And people are doing a lot of interesting work with indicators in the aquaculture space. So if any incoming students are interested in that, I think the indicators of basically how we know if we're implementing sustainable aquaculture practices well could be a really cool topic to focus on.
Great. All right, thanks, Sophie.